So we're gonna take this half drop and get it into Photoshop, but Photoshop, the way I have learned how to define patterns in it, it really likes things to be straight repeats. So there's a pretty simple formula for taking half drops and bricks and turning them into straight repeats. So I'm just gonna draw a really quick diagram. So if you have a half drop and it looks something like this. Okay. And one side is X, right? Let's call this side X. That's okay. And this side Y. And let's call this the half drop because that's the one we're doing right now. In order to make it into a straight repeat, we have to double the size because like the next rectangle is going to line up. Let me copy this layer. The next rectangle is going to line up like this, right? The next two, and we'll leave a tiny bit of space in between them so you can see the tiling. And we need to do is, I'm going to change it to red, is we have to isolate actually this box. So we end up multiplying x times 2. X times 2 to get this width. And that's for the half drop. And for this, for the brick, it's the opposite. I could draw a really quick diagram. So then this is still y for our new size. And we're going to copy and paste duplicates of our original drawing into there. So for the half drop, rectangle tool. I'm sorry, for the brick, we've got these guys actually. Some other programs I've used besides Spoonflower, like Redbubble, right? Which is another printing service. They only let you use straight repeats. Like you can put a tile in there, but it has to be in straight repeats. So this is useful to know in general. So for this guy, right, accidentally double clicked. If this is Y, let's make Y still the height, and this is X, the width, then the size of the pattern that we want to isolate to make it into a straight repeat is this size. So it's 2Y in that case. Okay, so back to our half drop that we want to make into a straight repeat. We are going to double the size of it, so the size of the canvas that we're on, and we can do that under image canvas size, I believe. And in here we can make the width, so that would be 7 inches without accounting for that third decimal point. It'll probably be fine. And there we go, it's doubled in size, and we can grab our first layer and we can move it over. And as long as I have view like smart guides on, right? Snap to, and I can choose what it snaps to, but I generally we have them all checked, and we can have snap checked. It will snap to like the edge of your folder, or sorry, your page and everything, and then we are going to duplicate the first layer twice, just like I did with my two rectangles actually, and drop these halfway down. And if I have my snaps on, it should snap just fine. And seems to have given me a tiny line in between, so I might just make the board a tiny bit smaller. I can also crop over here, the crop tool. But now you can see, right, how the spell book and the cat's tail go off the edge over here and they come back across directly. So they aren't dropping. See how that looks. Okay. So now if we go to edits, define pattern, I don't think we have to merge it first. Yeah, so it can do it all on these different layers, but the whole board is defined as a pattern. And now, back in any other file, what we can do is we can go to layer, new fill layer, and we can get a gradient or a solid color as just like a layer for the whole page. But instead we can choose pattern. And if we hit OK, we'll see our pattern. And we can scale it here. We can make it smaller or larger depending on what we wanted. Okay, so how do we get that onto a garment or an illustration? Let's grab something, and it's easy to do it with a white dress or a white garment, right? So with white garments, or really kind of not neutral, but like neutral saturation of like a solid color in general, something that's not black is going to give you a lot of tones to work with, which is fun. It's nice to have some texture in it. None of these make sense for the pattern that I'm using. We'll do this guy. So I'm going to copy this image, and it's nice if it's a nice and big image. This is pretty big. It'll be, that's actually not that great. So this is an 11 by 17 page. So let's see how it looks on here. Huh. Oh, command paste. Nope. Okay. Oh. All right, so that's very small. Let me find a bigger one. Remember, we can filter for size. Okay, so I'm going to delete all my other notes. So on this garment, I'm actually going to delete my pattern fill layer for now too. The first thing I want to do is a review of the selection tools. So Photoshop has a number of selection tools, and my favorite is the Polygon Lasso tool. The lasso tool works fine. It's just that you have to keep your mouse button held down the whole time, and that's annoying. So I'm going to use the Polygon Lasso tool, and I'm going to uncheck anti-alias and make sure there's zero feathering. I want these shapes that I'm going to make to be perfectly solid. Later on, we might use anti-aliasing in this demo. But for right now, all I'm going to do right now is color block these shapes out so that I can have access to them over and over again. And this has to do with how easy it is in Photoshop to select things that have the same fill color on them. So I'm going to pick around this carefully. And because her garment has two different parts to it, I am going to fill these parts with two different colors. And these aren't the final colors that the garment is going to be at the end. These are literally just in order to select them later on. So when I fill this, I'm going to choose a really gross color so that I don't forget. Remember hitting delete on the Polygon Lasso tool is how you step backwards, as opposed to the pen tool in Illustrator where you hit Command Z. And I'm going to fill this. My paint bucket tool lives under my gradient tool sometimes. Paint bucket. And I'm going to make a new layer, so I'm going to hit Command Z there because I did it on the original layer. So on my new layer, I'm going to fill that, and now it's totally solid. And what I can do is I can easily, with my magic wand tool, select this shape, and I've instantly selected every single pixel of her bottom half of her dress. And I would do the same thing with the top one. Because I've already butted up against the bottom of this, I don't have to pick along this line. When I go to fill it, the fill bucket is only going to fill up to the other solid color. So I only have to do essentially 3 sides of her. Try to do it quick. You can get as detailed with hair as you like. Like I could zoom in and go around some of these finer shapes. But a lot of time that gets very tedious and we end up just trying to make it into something bearable. Command minus to zoom out. You guys should be getting familiar with this from doing your design boards. All right, we're gonna leave her under cape white. It'll be fine. But I might go in and fill that with another color. So I'm gonna grab my bucket tool and choose another garish color. And when I hit fill here, even though it's selected all the way down into here, as long as I fill up here and I'm on that correct color blocking layer, it will fill just up to that point. So I'm going to rename this layer so that I don't forget to turn it off later. Come on, color block. And now we can really get to it and we can fill our page. So if I select all of the purple, and if I uncheck contiguous, it'll even fill that top section up there. And we could turn on anti-aliasing for this selection, but it's not going to matter as much, and it might actually help it smooth the outlines, because the outlines can get a little jaggedy if you don't leave anti-alias on. And since we don't have to select it again using this particular technique, we're going to go to New Fill Layer, Pattern, and we can hit OK. And it, with if I have that that selection made, it will automatically make a pattern fill layer that's clipped to the size of that selection. So we can make it smaller so that it looks until it looks reasonable on the garments. So click in and use the scroll wheel and hit OK. And I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom of her skirt, but first I have to switch back to the color block layer and select it. So layer, new fill layer, pattern. Okay. And there it is. And this is already interesting enough, except that with our transparency types, we can put a new, we can make this look more convincing, that's all. So I'm going to change it from normal to probably soft light, but again, I want to turn off my color block layer. So soft light wasn't quite right. Hard light maybe. Hard light does convincingly show me what it looks like, but it changes the background. It does funny things with gray backgrounds. We can maybe try overlay or hue. I always have to play around with these, especially if I'm using one with blacks in it. So multiply works well for dark colors. That's what it is. So we can see here, we can see some of the shading in the wrinkles again now, right? It looks more convincing. So let's try multiply on this top one, right? Because this is still solid. And it puts in some of that, that shadow back. I might even try lowering the opacity of it in general a little bit, just to see how that works. It's always sort of a game trying to get the opacity to look right. Okay. So we could, I was trying to think about how we could finesse some of the selection tools. If you click on, sorry, I'm using this bad language. There are two different little squares here, and they're linked together. And the one on the right that's black is your mask, your layer mask. So it's in the shape of your garment. So I can double click on this, and right now it's showing me this little section of this layer. And I think that you can go in and kind of make it a little bit cleaner, right? So her hair, it wasn't lining up very nice around her hair, and it was looking really jagged. So I don't really have to start over, but I can like go in here and clean it up. And I'm just using the magic wand tool, and I don't even have to hold shift. It's already doing this for me correctly. So that's just a nice little tip that you can double click on that, and it will ease in her hair. So I feel like if we had made this into a different colorway, it might have been a little bit nicer, and we can do that easily over here, right? So this is kind of another little mini lesson on recoloring in Photoshop. So let's say for whatever reason, maybe you lost the Illustrator file where you had built this and you wanted to recolor it, but you only had the JPEG. It's easy enough to recolor it in Photoshop with the magic wand tool, right? So I can select the cat. I'm going to merge these so they're all on the same layer, actually. So that's up here, and we can just say merge visible. And now they're all on one layer. And when I select, it will give me everything. And I want to shut off anti-alias, right? It's very important for this one that we shut off anti-alias because it might try to smooth around all the edges, and that would add like hundreds of other colors into your, and right now, although I don't think I did a perfect job of reducing this to 8, there are a limited number of colors in this. There's like, 16 or whatever. So if I turn my tolerance to 0, it should pick up just the things that are that exact color. And then I can grab the fill the paint bucket tool, and I could fill that exact color with a different color. And if I uncheck contiguous in the paint bucket tool, actually, Command Alt Z to step backwards in Photoshop. Command Z just toggles back and forth between the last things you did. So if I uncheck contiguous, it'll fill in all of that color at once. So I could go through and kind of methodically choose my new colors. And maybe I even noticed that some of the colors I have should be the same, and I could combine them. Maybe we make this an emerald, the paint bucket tool. And then I'm going to change the background color to something more colorful, I guess, but not crazy purple. So we've made some changes to our colors, and then we just have to go to Edit, Define Pattern in order to define it again. And then over here, we don't have to go through the whole process of like selecting and going to layer, fill layer pattern again. What we can do instead is just double click on the left side of this. So we double clicked on the right and we analyzed that. And now we're going to double click on this left thumbnail. And over here, we can change to our newly defined pattern. Okay, and if we had defined other patterns in here, and especially if we were on our home computer, and we were defining patterns frequently, we would have lots of patterns to choose from in here. But now that this is purple, I think that probably overlay or hard light might work better. So this is just an example of how these different settings work differently for different color tones. Like it works a lot better on this lighter purple to use hard light. Even though this isn't quite the right color, getting color matching exactly on these mock-ups is kind of a pain. Okay. So we did this guy. So now I just want to touch on what if you wanted to do color reduction like from your original scan in Photoshop. Let me just download this. So if we open that guy up, so we worked with this Halloween print last week. Oops. It's sideways right now. You can always rotate things by going to image rotation, and this is going to flip your everything in your Photoshop file. If you want to rotate things individually, that's Command T. So we're going to flip it counterclockwise. Okay, so I am not going to try to reduce all of this together. I am going to grab some specific part of it and show you how I might reduce that. So I'm going to grab these guys and hit Command copy. And if I have something copied so it's on my clipboard, I can make it, if I go to File, New, my new document that says clipboard right here, and the new document that it's automatically making is just the right size for them. So these have a lot of texture to them, and I want my textile design to be completely flat and maybe almost like maybe just 4 or 5 colors. So I'm going to grab my magic wand tool, and we want a pretty high tolerance for it. Right now, if I click with 0 tolerance, it's gonna just do this kind of sparkly thing because it's only picking up like 1 pixel here and there. So we want something higher than that. So this looks pretty good. I think it could get maybe even a little bit closer to the edge of these. So I'm gonna up it maybe a little further. We'll call that good. And we can actually just hit delete because I don't care about the white background. But for these guys, what I can do is start clicking on them. And let's say I want this top part of them to be pretty solid green. So it's not picking up quite everything that I want. What I can do is I can hold Shift, and we can always hit Command Z to go backwards. I could lower my tolerance a bit and hold Shift, and it'll start picking up some stuff that's closer, right? And then let's say I'm like mostly okay with this, but there are some parts where I'm not okay with it picking into this next darker green. Okay. I can shift between the Magic Wand tool to my Polygon Lasso tool. So I have a little bit too much selected in this one. I'm going to hold Command Alt, and I get that minus sign next to it, right? If I held Shift, it would add to my selection. If I hold Alt, it minuses, and I can choose around the points that I don't want it to have, and it will subtract those. So switching back and forth between them is always nice, and like it didn't pick up every spot that I wanted it to pick up in that section of the green, so I can hold Shift and add it to it there. Right, so Option or Alt to kind of get rid of that section, and Shift to add it in. So you could spend a lot of time picking around these. So then we could fill this with a new color. And we want to do this on a new layer, right? Because working on this layer, hitting fill with the paint bucket tool, it might not fill totally because of like the texture of them. So we're going to hit new layer, and we're going to fill on this layer with the paint bucket tool. And if I hold Option with the paint bucket tool, I get an eyedropper, and I can pick from my piece to get the solid color that is going to dominate them. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're on the right layer. Okay, so that filled them cleanly and solidly, and you could do the same thing with some of the next colors. If we switch back to the correct layer, we can hold Shift and choose more than one point. Oh, it's selected. So because this white is like near to the transitional color, I'm going to shut off my layer 2, right? It's near to the transitional color between the two layers of like the background and the foreground of the paint. It's picking up some on the outside, so let's see. I'm going to deselect and try to lower the tolerance a little bit. So that's just the kind of thing you would be facing. But once we have something we like, we can switch back to our fill layer. And again, oh, my fill had anti-alias on last time, so we'll see how it does. But we want anti-alias unchecked most of the time. Hold Option. Okay. Try to do these next guys very quick. See, I filled that on the wrong layer, and it seemed to work fine, but I'm going to hit Command-Z and fill it on the correct layer, switch back, select. Okay. So shutting off the bottom layer, we could see we would still have a lot of cleaning up to do. So it might be that it's easier on these to not use the magic wand tool and to just select with the selection tool and fill that way with the direct selection tool. But I could grab either the pencil tool or the brush tool and get kind of a small thing going and just start to fill these in, right? So it's a lot less straightforward to do color reduction in Photoshop, right? Because in Illustrator, we can just auto trace, or we can trace with the pen tool, and we never have to worry about anti-aliasing. So it might be that if I had spent more time selecting, we would have had an easier job of it too. Okay. So really quick, I want to show you how to make a repeating pattern from scratch in Photoshop. And this is definitely not as easy to do as in Illustrator. So I am going to crop this close to it. And while I'm here, I'm going to select a few of these and just copy them. So I'm just going to have them on my clipboard and then deselect. And now we are going to utilize a function in Illustrator, and it's under Filter Other, and it's called Offset. And in order to use it properly, we need to know the size of our artboard or our picture. So we are going to go to Image, Canvas Size, and we're actually going to change this to pixels so we can be very precise And we can write down these numbers. So I am actually going to take a screenshot of them. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to change I'm going to change these both to be even numbers because it's easier when they're even numbers. So what was that? Oh, shoot. Pixels and 48 instead of 47 and 60 instead of 61. Okay. So with that knowledge in hand, we actually need to divide those numbers in half to the calculator. $230, and I can draw right on here sometimes. Doesn't want me to right now. So 230 by 548. $230 by 274. 230 by 274. Oops, back in Photoshop, we are going to go to Filter, Other, Offset, and we are going to offset them by 274 and 230. And these have now split them exactly down the middle. And our little motif, if we had repeated it beforehand, right, it would have had these big gaps in the corners, right? So if we had repeated it before, we would have had this big gap in the center. So now we can see that gap and we can fill it. So I can grab those guys that I just copied earlier, or I could grab other ones that are still whole, right? And we don't want to touch the edge of the artboard ever. But we can fill this center of the artboard just fine. Hit Control T or Command T to rotate and to scale, right? So we can adjust. Hit Enter to apply it. So once we have filled that hole, we want to merge them back onto one layer. And then we could apply Filter Offset again. And see, this is our original motif, these little shapes that I had drawn. And now we have some pieces in the corner that go off the edge and repeat appropriately. So this guy comes off that edge. So that's just for a straight repeat. We could now go to, well, let me give it a background color. Something. But we could go to Edit, Define Pattern, and there it is, right? If we went to Layer, New Fill Layer, it would be there. But here it is on our new garment. And this is a very light background color, so it might be that we even played with a different opacity setting over here, right? We could try soft light overlay color. So it's just something to play with. Multiply works very well there. So that is that, I think. Yeah, I'm kind of into it. I don't know. It's fine. If we wanted to, just while we're here, just to make it a thorough video, I doubt you'll ever make these in Photoshop, but if we wanted to make this a half drop instead, and let me go to my history. If we wanted to make this a half drop, we would again have to double our canvas size, right? So if this is 1.5, we'll make it 3. And right, is this right for a half drop or for a brick? I think we would be making it a brick in this case, but that's fine. And we'll lower this this layer to the bottom half. And then we are again going to use filter other offset. And if you just choose filter offset up here, right, filter always displays the very last filter you used at the top. It won't give you the panel. So if you have to change any of the numbers that you just used, it won't work appropriately. So we can choose filter offset. And a key to filter offset is to have wraparound checked, although this isn't working. So we'll start with it both on 0. And again, I should have known my numbers. Image, canvas size. What if we make both of them easy numbers? Okay, so it's 1.5 inches by 3 inches, so I can go to filter, other offset, and oh right, this is done in pixels, but 1.5 times 300, right, because it's 300 pixels per inch, is 450. Divided by 2 because we want to move it to the half, so 225. I know the math's overwhelming. So 225, and I'm going to start with my vertical at 0. This, just like at the bottom of a dress or something, that would be cool. Yeah, to make it into an engineered. And then, except this doesn't look like it's actually rolling over. I don't know. Oh well, we'll see how it goes. Sorry, I want to copy this layer first, actually twice for the half drop, and I forgot that before I started. Transforming it. So filter, other, offset, we want to move it up by what is it? So it would be 1.5 times 300 because that's 3 inches, right? Yeah, So 450 pixels up. Okay, so for some reason it's not rolling over correctly. I think I might make a new artboard really quick with these dimensions. So I'm going to copy that. It's 3 and the height is 5. Move these to the bottom. Filter other offset. I'm sorry, this is maybe not worth it. I think this was in the wrong, oh no. I know. I'm trying to move this here and also here. Yeah, and then it would like file off correctly, but it's not working quite right. It's not cooperating with me. So give me just one more try. And image canvas size, and let's check it in pixels. 450 by 900. So it wants to move up 450 and then 225 over. That's what I have it at. Filter other offset up to 50. Oh, maybe it's that it has to be negative because that's pixels down. I don't know. I'm having the hardest time. Yeah, that's right, and that's tiling now, but this has to go up a little bit more. So we'll move it 300 pixels and we'll make a note of that. But the left and the right, it is tiling off appropriately. And then we can crop it to 600 pixels, I guess. I think that's what I want. Crop. Come on. I guess it doesn't matter as long as we're defining it as a straight repeat anyway. I'm just going to crop it down to size. It does.
It doesn't want you to be happy.
It's that it's jealous of Illustrator. It's saying you can't be as easy as Illustrator. But we can use filter other offset again, but we're gonna do it on the whole layer, right? So I'm even gonna merge them. And now we'll be able to see the hole in the center where it's missing stuff, and we could paste some stuff in there if we wanted to. Pasted too much stuff, but that's kind of the idea. And now if we defined this, it would probably repeat, and it would probably look half drop-ish.
Half-drop-ish. Loosely translate to it.
So if I go to, actually let me spread these out. Right, so even though these three are on the same layer, I can move them individually if I select around them with the selection tool and then move back to this selection, this like grabby tool, right? And I can move them to other spots that are still open. Edit define pattern. Let's see how it looks. So it tiles, and it does look like it is it's like functioning as a half drop. See that big swirl? Big swirl is jumping back and forth. So that was a lame demo, but it is possible to do this in Photoshop. There we go.